Chapter 7. Backdoor. The monotony of the day droned on, but by the third customer since Felicia, I had managed to master how to adapt my behaviour to Io's expectations. It was a delicate balance, ensuring I looked completely subservient, yet also giving him just the tiniest token of imperfection in my work for him to find fault enough to not suspect my behaviour. So I ran but held back. I wrote but ensured tweaks when needed, and I climbed those rickety stairs firmly but not enough to look excited. It wasn't easy, though. Beneath that well-planned and performed charade, I was a turmoil of emotions, longing to taste freedom, to step beyond the realms of my world, the only world that I had ever known, which now I knew was a prison, and to stare upon dear, dear Felicia, without that separation of glass, that torturous division, so thin yet so distinct. The waves of excitement, though, also evaporated at times, giving way to debilitating pangs of fear as I pondered, and more frighteningly, imagined Io finding us or stopping us. My only solace, which broke the spell of fear, was that whatever Io's cruel hands had done to me that day, to make me forget, would not work again. I would not forget. I would not give him the satisfaction and risk not knowing that face again. No, there was no failure. I had to succeed. And so the time whiled away, and I patiently waited. 10, then 20 people tapping at the windows, each one causing my heart to jump at the hope it was her. But alas, each one was nothing more than another test of my charade, an addition to my fear. Just as I was beginning to wonder if Felicia would ever come, a tap came from the far end. I dashed over to see, my eyes hardly able to look. It was her. She was peering in that dusty, unused window where we had last met. She smiled, but her face was full of anxiety. She gestured for me to go, and I knew what I had to do. Wasting no time, I ran as hard as I could, surprised by how fast my long legs could now carry me. Through aisles of books I dashed, meandering and weaving on a route I had carefully planned out 100 times to the very back of the library. It was a place where new books arrived. How? I had never pondered, and now was not the time. All that mattered was that I got there, and I got there as swiftly as I could. The gloomy darkness of the library increased the further I went, as if it was too much effort for even the lamplight to reach. There, right at the very back, I spotted the gap between a blue and red-tinged bookcase. I stopped in front of the blank wooden wall, hardly letting my breath and heart catch up before I scanned the surface. Suddenly, there was a strange high-pitched sound, and a secret door began opening, hidden in the wooden panels. It creaked and groaned ajar, a bright light searing in. I stood firmly, tall and resolute. Then I was staring face to face for the first time with Felicia, no longer separated by the cruel glass. She stood tall, taller than she had looked through the windows, yet her face was as lovely, no, lovelier than ever. "Quick," she gasped, "we don't have much." But the tail end of the word was rudely interrupted by an ear-splitting alarm that erupted. She anxiously shot a look around, and I took a step towards her, the doorway and my freedom just a mere step further. But then I felt myself pulled backwards and was blocked by Io. His face was red with rage, but he no longer loomed tall over me. I refused to buckle in fear of him, no longer a tiny child. He turned away from me towards the open door, which Felicia was wrestling with to keep ajar. He stretched his fingers out and grasped the door. Heaving and puffing, he pushed it. She battled, her eyes looking beyond Io, firmly to me. "This is an illegal entrance. You cannot open it. I will cancel your customer rights forever," he shouted coldly at Felicia. But that only made her face more resolute and her heave harder. Io shouted something, and another man came. He dashed past me, a blur of brown overalls. He too grabbed and heaved on the door, till alas Felicia lost, the last shards of light marking her failure. The door clicked shut and disappeared back into the wall. Turning to me, his eyes wide and hands shaking, he roared, "You wait right there, child. I will deal with you in a minute." He turned back to the man all dressed in brown, which I then realized had a belt full of tools. "You need to fix this, Archie," Io said in a polite tone. "Quickly." "Of course, sir," he said, already carefully inspecting the panels through his thick glasses. "Very interesting, sir. Seems it was made by—" But his complex and detailed explanation was cut off by Io tapping his watch and impatiently saying, "As soon as you can. Time is money after all." Archie pulled numerous tools from his belt and began cutting, shaving and remodelling the wood, his carpentry hands a blur as Io watched, nodding in satisfaction. I watched the two as they closed the only way to freedom I had had. Anger seething inside me, my blood felt hot, and I wanted to punish Io, like all those times he had beaten me as a small child. I was no child now, though. I could probably overpower him, I thought. I realized then, in fact, the only hold he had had over me for a while was simply the fear and memories of his violent demeanour, that and the idea of being obsolete to him. I knew when he wielded that fear, I had buckled and felt like a small child again. I remembered my reflection in the windows, though. I was not that child any more, and from that moment I knew his rule over me was finished. I felt my fist ball and the rage grow. How dare he treat me like that? How dare he keep me a prisoner? And how dare he sadden the face of dear Felicia? My arms shook with rage. I took a step forwards towards Io's turned back. "I don't want to be your prisoner any more," I shouted. Io stepped back in sudden surprise, but quickly composed himself. I stared Io right in the eye, standing now as tall as he, defiantly and firmly. Io shook his head, undeterred. "You have deviated too far from the way. You will be of no use to us now. You cannot serve. You will be removed, discarded for good." He stepped towards me, his eyes blazing. My fear heightened. The words "removed" and "discarded" seemed to chip away at my firm legs, coupled with the trauma of countless memories, and they began to shake. I wanted to raise my arm and knock him to the ground, take my freedom for my own, but that fear refused to let go, refused to loosen its grip on my heart. So I turned and ran like I'd never run before, till the place lightened and I glimpsed the windows. The end of the road for me. This would be where I, Kentaro, would make my last stand. It would be my defining moment. But to my sudden delight, I saw at the dusky old window a frantic Felicia shouting and flapping her arms to come to her. I rushed over, tears streaming from my eyes, the thought of that cruel glass being the viewpoint from which she witnessed my demise. But then she held her hands out straight in a curious way, beckoning me to step back. Suddenly, wielding a massive hammer, she brought it down with full intent upon the window, causing cracks to meander across the surface. Again she swung, concluding with another crunch, and again determination burning in her eyes. The third blow smashed the window, causing razor-sharp fragments to fly in all directions, some grazing past my face, leaving stinging lacerations. I wiped the trickling blood which had run into my eyes. "Quick, give me your hand," Felicia shouted, her eyes wide, looking beyond me. I wasted a moment to look round, and to my horror, Io was already almost upon us. I looked up at Felicia's eyes. Time seemed to pause for a single beat. Then I scrambled and heaved with all my might, kicking forwards and pulling on Felicia's strong grip. The broken glass in the window felt like it bit me as I scrambled through it, out, to the other side and the unknown.